Across Europe, there is a specific kind of attack that keeps happening to mosques. Not graffiti, not broken windows, pork, slabs of it, sometimes an entire pig's head left at the entrance where worshippers take off their shoes. Nobody has to explain what it means. Everyone already knows. Because in Islam, pork is not simply a food that people skip. It is named directly in the Quran, argued over by scholars for 1,400 years, defended by hundreds of millions of people who have never tasted it and never will, and used by their enemies as a weapon of humiliation from medieval Spain to modern France. But here is the question almost nobody stops to ask. Why this animal? Out of every creature on earth, why did the pig become the line that a quarter of humanity refuses to cross? The answer is older than Islam itself, and it is stranger than you think. If you find this interesting, subscribe. This channel breaks down the beliefs, rituals, and histories that shape how billions of people actually live, one story at a time. Now let's go back to the beginning. Start with what the text actually says, because everything else grows out of it. The Quran prohibits pork in 4 separate places. The wording is almost identical each time. Forbidden to you is dead meat, blood, the flesh of swine, and anything dedicated to other than God. 4 items on the list: carrion, blood, pig, and meat slaughtered in another god's name. That is a very short list. The Quran is not, on the whole, an obsessive rulebook about food. Compared to the dietary law in the Hebrew Bible, which sorts the entire animal kingdom into clean and unclean and runs through fins, scales, hooves, cud, insects, and birds of prey, the Quranic list is startlingly small, and the pig is the only animal on it mentioned by name. Think about what that means. Blood is a substance. Carrion is a condition. Meat offered to idols is defined by intention, but the pig is a specific, living, named creature. Khinzir. It gets singled out in a way no other animal does. There is one more mention, and it is the one that would echo for centuries in ways that had nothing to do with dinner. In chapter 5, the Quran describes a group cursed by God and transformed in the text's imagery into apes and swine. That phrase has been quoted, misused, and thrown as an insult in every century since. We will come back to it because you cannot understand why pork carries such emotional weight without understanding that the pig, in this tradition, is not a neutral animal. But first, the obvious question, why did the Quran forbid it in the first place? And the honest answer is that the Quran does not say. This is the part that surprises people. There is no verse explaining the reasoning, no health warning, no sentence saying pigs are dirty, or that they carry disease, or that they eat garbage. The prohibition arrives as a command, complete and unexplained, and then it moves on. For Muslim scholars, this silence became a category of its own. Islamic law divides rulings into 2 kinds. Some have a reason a human being can work out. Others are what jurists call ta'abudi, meaning devotional. You obey because you were told to obey, and the reasoning belongs to God, not to you. Pork sits right at the center of that argument, and it has for over 1,000 years. The strict position is simple. The prohibition is a test. Its whole function is to be followed without justification, because a rule you obey only when you agree with it is not obedience at all. It is preference wearing a costume. The other camp went looking for reasons anyway, and they found plenty. Reason 1, and by far the most popular, is health. Ask a Muslim on the street why pork is forbidden, and you will very often hear about disease. Pigs carry parasites. Pork carries worms, trichinella, tapeworm. Undercooked pork can genuinely make you very sick. And in the ancient world, when nobody understood microbiology and nobody could reliably measure internal temperature, that risk was not theoretical. There is a real problem with this argument, though, and serious scholars have been pointing it out for a long time. Trichinella was not identified until the 19th century. If the ban was about a parasite that nobody could see, describe, or name until roughly 1,200 years after the Quran was revealed, then either the reasoning was hidden from the very people expected to follow it, or the reasoning was invented afterward to make an old rule sound modern. And there is a second problem, which is even harder to answer. If the reason is disease, then the reason can be removed. Modern industrial pork in a regulated country is tested frozen, inspected, and cooked to temperature. Trichinosis in commercial pork is now vanishingly rare in most developed food systems. So if health was the whole point, the prohibition should be expiring right about now. It is not expiring. It is not even softening. If anything, Muslim vigilance about pork has intensified in the last 50 years, at exactly the moment when pork became safer than at any point in human history. That tells you the health explanation is not doing the work people think it is doing. Reason 2 is diet and disgust. Pigs are omnivores. They will eat scraps, refuse, and worse. In a pre-modern village, the pig was often functioning as a waste disposal system with legs. Many cultures found that repulsive, and the repulsion attached itself to the meat. Reason 3 is ecological, and this is where it gets genuinely fascinating. The anthropologist Marvin Harris made an argument in the 1970s that still gets debated today. Forget theology for a second, he said, and look at the animal. A pig cannot sweat properly. It has almost no functional sweat glands, which is why pigs wallow. Wallowing is not filth. It is thermoregulation. A pig in a hot, dry climate, without shade and without water, will overheat and die. Now look at where the prohibition originated. The Near East. Arid, hot, sparse in water, sparse in shade. Then look at the pig's diet. Cows, goats, sheep, and camels eat grass and scrub, which humans cannot digest. They turn worthless vegetation into milk, meat, wool, and transport. A pig cannot do that. A pig eats grain, nuts, tubers, and roots, which is to say, a pig eats the same food a human being eats. In a marginal environment, that makes the pig a competitor rather than a partner. Every pound of grain going into a pig is a pound of grain not going into a person. And unlike a cow or a camel or a goat, the pig gives you nothing while it is alive. No milk, no wool, no labor. It cannot be herded across distance. It cannot follow a nomadic tribe through the desert. It exists purely to be killed and eaten. Harris's conclusion was that pig keeping in that region was an ecological trap, tempting in good years, catastrophic in bad ones, and that religious prohibition was the most durable way a society could enforce a rule that individuals had every short-term incentive to break. It is a compelling theory. It is also contested, and the counter-argument is strong. Archaeology shows pigs were absolutely kept and eaten across the ancient Near East for thousands of years, in Egypt, in Mesopotamia, and in the Levant. Pig bones turn up in the trash pits of ordinary people. If pigs were simply impossible there, that would be a strange thing to keep finding. Which brings us to the theory that goes in the opposite direction. The anthropologist Mary Douglas looked at the Hebrew dietary laws and noticed something nobody had focused on before. The rules are not random. They are a classification system. Land animals in that system are supposed to have two features: split hooves and the ability to chew cud. Cows do both, sheep do both, goats do both. Camels chew cud but have the wrong feet. Rabbits, in the text's own logic, chew but do not have hooves. And the pig? The pig has perfect split hooves and does not chew cud at all. The pig is not just unclean in that system, the pig is an anomaly. It looks like it should belong, and it does not. It sits on the border between categories, and a mind that finds order sacred will find a border creature disturbing. Douglas's argument was that impurity is not really about hygiene at all. Impurity is about things that scramble the categories. Dirt, in her famous formulation, is matter out of place. The pig is an animal out of place. Whether or not you buy the theory, the pattern it describes is real. In Judaism, the pig became the emblem of everything forbidden, far beyond its actual importance as a food. The camel is also prohibited. Nobody built an identity around refusing camel. The pig got the symbolism. Islam inherited a world where that symbolism already existed and already carried enormous weight. By the 7th century, when the Quran was revealed, the Arabian Peninsula was surrounded by pork-avoiding communities. Jewish tribes lived in Arabia, and their law had prohibited pig for well over 1,000 years by that point. The Hebrew Bible names it directly, and by the 2nd century before the Common Era, refusing pork had already become the definitive test of Jewish loyalty. During the persecution under Antiochus, the stories that survive are not about abstract theology. They are about Jews being ordered to eat pig flesh in public and choosing death instead. That is a crucial moment in the history of this food. Pork stopped being a dietary matter and became a loyalty test. Eat it, and you have renounced who you are. Refuse it, and you may die for it. That association, once created, never went away. Meanwhile, in Arabia itself, pigs barely featured. The peninsula was a landscape of camels, goats, and sheep. Bedouin life was mobile, and pigs do not travel. For most Arabs of that era, pork was not a temptation being taken away from them. It was a food they already did not eat, which raises a genuinely interesting point. When the Quran forbade pork, it was not banning a beloved staple. It was formalizing something close to an existing norm and connecting the new community to a much older prophetic tradition that had drawn the same line. That does not diminish the ruling. If anything, it explains why it stuck so completely and so quickly. There was no resistance to overcome. Once the prohibition was established, the jurists went to work, and they went far beyond the meat. Classical Islamic law treats the pig as najis, ritually impure in its entirety. This is a stronger status than simply forbidden to eat. Most schools of law hold that the impurity covers the whole animal: the flesh, the fat, the bones, the skin, the bristles, and the blood. Compare that to a cow that dies of natural causes. That carcass is forbidden to eat, but the hide can be tanned and used, and most jurists agree tanning purifies it. Try that logic with a pig, and the majority position slams the door. There is no tanning your way out. That single ruling has enormous downstream consequences, and they are the reason a Muslim consumer in 2026 has to read ingredient labels like a forensic accountant. Because the pig is not just in the butcher's window anymore. The pig is in the supply chain. Modern industrial food processing takes the pig apart with a thoroughness that would astonish a medieval jurist. Gelatin is the biggest one. It is made by boiling collagen out of skin, bone, and connective tissue. And a great deal of the world's gelatin is porcine. It is in gummy sweets. It is in marshmallows. It is in some yogurts, some soft cheeses, some capsules, some frosted cereals, and a surprising number of things that have no business containing an animal at all. Then there is lard, which still shows up in baked goods and pastry in parts of Europe and Latin America. There are emulsifiers with numbers instead of names, some derived from plants, some from animal fat, and the label frequently will not tell you which. There are enzymes used in cheesemaking. There is stearic acid, there are flavor carriers, and then it moves out of the kitchen entirely. Heparin, one of the most widely used blood thinners on Earth, is manufactured from pig intestines. Heart valve replacements are commonly made from porcine tissue. For decades, insulin was extracted from pig pancreases before synthetic production took over. Some vaccines have historically used porcine gelatin as a stabilizer. So the Muslim world ran directly into a question that 14 centuries of jurisprudence had never quite had to face at this scale. What happens when the forbidden thing has been chemically transformed beyond recognition, and what happens when refusing it might kill you? The escape hatches. Islamic law has two answers, and they are both older than the problem. The first is necessity. Every one of the 4 prohibition verses ends the same way. Whoever is forced by necessity, without willful disobedience and without transgressing, commits no sin. The permission is right there in the text, in the same breath as the ban. Classical jurists built an entire doctrine on it. Darura. Necessity makes the forbidden permissible. If you are starving and the only food is pork, you do not merely have permission to eat it. Many scholars argued you have an obligation to eat it because preserving your life outranks preserving your diet. The limits are strict. You take what you need to survive and no more. You do not develop a taste for it. But the door is genuinely open, and it always has been. The second concept is subtler, and it is doing enormous work in the modern world. Istihala, transformation. The principle is that when a substance is chemically transformed into something with entirely different properties, its legal status can change with it. The classic textbook example is wine turning to vinegar. Wine is forbidden. Vinegar is not. Same barrel, different substance, different ruling. So when scholars in the 20th and 21st century looked at gelatin, they asked whether boiling collagen into a completely new compound counts as istihala, and they split. Some said yes. The Islamic Organization for Medical Sciences in Kuwait issued a widely cited ruling in 2001 accepting that gelatin transformed from porcine sources had become a different substance. Others rejected this, arguing that gelatin is still recognizably a protein derived from the animal, that no true transformation has occurred, and that the door, once opened, does not close. Then, medicine forced the issue. In 2018, Indonesia launched a mass measles and rubella vaccination campaign. The vaccine contained porcine-derived components. Parents refused. Vaccination rates in some provinces collapsed. Children were at genuine risk of preventable disease and preventable death. Indonesia's top clerical body issued a fatwa that pleased almost nobody and was, in its way, entirely honest. It declared the vaccine haram in substance, but permissible to use because there was no adequate alternative and the harm of the disease was real and immediate, forbidden and permitted at the same time. That is what 14 centuries of legal reasoning looks like when it collides with an epidemiologist's timeline. The industry built on a single word. There is a reason all of this matters commercially, and the numbers are not small. The global halal food market is worth well over $1 trillion a year, and it is growing faster than the conventional food market it sits inside. Certification bodies now audit slaughterhouses, dairy plants, confectionery factories, cosmetics lines, and pharmaceutical manufacturers. Entire national economies have positioned themselves around it. Malaysia turned halal certification into a strategic export industry. Brazil, a country with almost no Muslim population, became one of the largest suppliers of halal meat on earth because it read the demand curve early. And every one of those auditors is looking for the same thing first. The pig. Not just pork on a plate, traces in a machine, shared production lines, a conveyor belt that ran bacon in the morning, and biscuits in the afternoon. Lubricants, cleaning agents, whether the gelatin in a vitamin capsule came from a cow or a hog. A single word in a 7th century verse now generates compliance paperwork in factories on 6 continents. That is what a taboo looks like when it scales. Now we can finally answer the real question. Not why is pork forbidden, but why does it feel so much bigger than any other prohibition? Because alcohol is also forbidden. Interest on loans is forbidden. Gambling is forbidden. Those rules are broken constantly in every Muslim community on earth by people who still consider themselves believers. Pork is different. Pork holds. Ask a Muslim who drinks, who has never prayed regularly, who has not fasted in years, whether they eat pork. In an enormous number of cases, the answer is an immediate and slightly offended no. Not because of theology, because of something deeper and harder to argue with. Pork became identity, and it became identity because of what happened to people who were forced to eat it. In 1492, Spain expelled its Jews. 10 years later, it began forcing its Muslims to convert, and then the Inquisition faced a problem it could not solve by decree. How do you know if a conversion is real? You cannot see belief. You cannot audit a prayer, but you can watch what someone eats. Historians who have studied Inquisition records describe how food became evidence. Neighbors informed on households that avoided pork, whether someone cooked with lard, whether they cleaned the drains before a certain day, whether they refused a slice of ham at a wedding. These were written into denunciations and used in trials. And so a defense mechanism emerged. Eat pork loudly, eat it publicly, hang the cured ham where visitors can see it. There is a widely repeated tradition in Spain that this is exactly why jamón hangs so proudly in so many taverns, a habit born as proof of orthodoxy in a country where suspicion could destroy you. Whether or not that origin story is literally true in every tavern, the underlying dynamic is thoroughly documented. Pork was not just food in that world, pork was testimony. And for the Muslims and Jews of Spain, refusing it was the last thing you could hold on to after your language, your name, your clothing, and your mosque had all been taken. Fast forward 3.5 centuries to India, 1857. The British East India Company issued a new rifle to its Indian soldiers. To load it, the soldier had to bite open a paper cartridge that had been greased to keep the powder dry. Rumors spread through the barracks that the grease was made from beef tallow and pig fat. For the Hindu soldiers, that meant the cow. For the Muslim soldiers, it meant the pig. In one stroke, the British had handed a rifle to their own troops and asked them to put the most offensive possible substance into their mouths. Every single time, they fired it. The company insisted it was a misunderstanding. It offered to let soldiers grease their own cartridges. It was far, far too late. What followed was the largest uprising against British rule in the 19th century. And it began, in part, because someone in a procurement office did not think about grease. That is the power of this taboo. Not a preference, not a dietary quirk, a rebellion. Now come forward to 2009. Swine flu was spreading around the world. Egypt's government announced it would cull every pig in the country, roughly 300,000 animals. There was one problem. Swine flu was not being spread by pigs. It was spreading human to human, and the World Health Organization said so publicly. The cull had no epidemiological justification whatsoever, and the pigs did not belong to Egypt's Muslim majority. They belonged to the Zabaleen, Cairo's Coptic Christian garbage collectors, who for generations had run one of the most efficient informal recycling systems on Earth. They collected the city's organic waste and fed it to their pigs. The pigs converted the waste into meat, and the meat fed and funded the community. The government killed the pigs anyway. The waste stayed where it was. Rotting organic garbage piled up in the streets of Cairo because the animals that used to eat it were gone and no system replaced them. Egypt eventually had to admit the whole thing had been a mistake. An entire livelihood dismantled in weeks over an animal that was not causing the problem in a country where the majority does not eat it and the minority depended on it. You do not get a policy like that from a health regulation. You get it from a symbol. Which brings us to the ugliest chapter and the reason we opened where we did. Because the people who hate Muslims figured out a long time ago exactly which button this is. Leaving pork at mosque doors, sending pig fat to Islamic centers, threats to bury remains with pig carcasses, politicians in Europe proposing pork-only school menus as a deliberate provocation, knowing precisely who it targets. Online abuse that reaches, every single time, for the same animal. It works as a weapon precisely because the taboo is sincere. You cannot desecrate something that nobody holds sacred, and the pig is not only a food to be avoided, it is the animal named in a verse about people transformed by divine curse. It carries a symbolic weight in the tradition that goes beyond diet. That is exactly why an attacker reaches for it, and exactly why it lands. So when someone leaves a pig's head at a mosque, they are not making a comment about lunch. They are making a claim about what the people inside that building are. The title of this video says, "Pork is the most hated food in Islam." That framing sells, and there is enough truth in it to be worth interrogating. So let's finish by being straight about it. Most Muslims do not hate pork. You cannot hate a taste you have never experienced. Hundreds of millions of people have simply never had the thought cross their mind. In the same way, most people reading this have never once considered eating a horse or a dog or an insect, even though all three are perfectly ordinary foods somewhere on this planet. What actually happened is that a boundary got drawn a very long time ago, in a specific landscape for reasons the text never bothered to explain. Then history did what history does. That boundary got tested. People were killed for holding it. People were forced to break it as proof of surrender. Empires stumbled over it. Governments slaughtered a minority's livestock because of it, and bigots learned to use it as a blade. Every one of those events welded the rule tighter into identity, until refusing pork stopped being an act of obedience and became an act of belonging. The health arguments came later, and they were never the real reason. The ecological arguments are clever and possibly true, and completely beside the point for the person standing in a supermarket aisle reading an ingredient list. The rule survived because of what it came to mean, and that is the strange and very human truth underneath a line in a 7th century text. It was never really about the pig. It was about who you are when someone tells you to eat one. If you want to understand more of what actually shapes the way billions of people eat, pray, and live, subscribe. Next, we are breaking down why the cow became sacred in India, a taboo built on the exact opposite logic and one that has caused just as much history. That video is on screen now.